Raising children is always an adventure, and young boys are often capable of mischief and mayhem. Parenting expert Bill Corbett joins us this morning to teach us how we can raise boisterous boys. Bill, thank you so much for joining us
Glad
today.
to be here, Seth.
So fundamentally, because I don't have kids yet, what are the differences between raising boys and raising girls?
Most things are the same with children. However, there's a couple of factors that parents have to take into consideration. Boys are more active because of testosterone in the boys' system, the child's system. There's more need to act out. Now, it doesn't say, I'm not saying that girls don't act out and want to move around, but boys tend to more. Boys learn and develop, go through the development stages by being able to act out and move around. And also, there's some other things that we're going to talk about that makes raising boys a little bit more challenging, and if parents are just a little more aware of it, it makes their life a little easier.
Well, and I would think it's even exponentially harder when boys are grouped together and they're playing together because it's kind of exponential mischief, you know what I mean?
Right, yes, that does occur.
So you have some tips today to help us out with raising our boys. The first one is to allow appropriate rough play.
Right. So I say that boys need rough play. And some girls need rough play as well, but you'll tend to find it more in boys. And I say appropriate rough play. That means create environments for them to tumble, to jump, to flip over. That's what they love to do. Boys, the brains develop through movement, more movement of the body. And so create it appropriately, making sure to have perhaps a playroom with soft pads or quilts on the floor, with breakable items out of the way. Create an environment for them to be able to act out like that, because you know what parents are usually doing? Take that outside. Take that outside right now, right?
Yeah.
And so the parent is good to let them do that, but it's a little dangerous just to throw them outside. So create an environment so they can tumble and toss.
I think on that note too, I think you need to draw an important distinction too when it's roughhousing and play and when it gets a little violent. You need to watch that line, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When they're starting to hurt each other, sometimes they just need to be separated. Maybe it's time to call off the rough play for a while and maybe even introduce them, redirect their attention to something less physical. Maybe that's a time to allow a little bit of television, and I say a little bit, limited with time. Video games perhaps, but maybe even bring them to reading and coloring, but it's time to just redirect them to something else.
And that brings us to our next tip, which is to communicate with the child directly.
Yes. One of the things I wrote about in my book, which is interesting, is boys interact a little differently than girls, okay? And I've noticed there's been university studies where they watch little girls playing together, and the little girls don't even have to look at each other. They're both looking in the same direction, playing with dolls or whatever they play with, and they can communicate. They can hear each other, and they get it. The funny thing about us guys, if you're not looking at the boy directly in his eyes, sometimes we don't hear it. I know one time my wife said to me, and she was on the other side of the room, she wasn't looking at me, she goes, "I think we should clean out the closet today." And I said, "That's nice." And I just went about my way, but I didn't understand. She was basically telling me, we will clean out the closet.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do with parents of boys is take them by their hands or their arms and look them directly at eye level and have very clear instructions. You'll be more successful.
I think it's even true for grown men too. I think I need that every once in a while. The third tip that you have is to teach boys to express their emotions.
And we're not always good at doing that. The way our chemical system is, the way our electrical system is built, we don't do that because we're hunters. Let's go after the next thing. Let's not stop and process.
Exactly.
And the best thing we can do is to teach our boys to process. And that means all parents should be able to do is say, how did that make you feel? Well, if you reflect back on something that happened and your little boy looks sad or angry or excited, say, oh my gosh, how did that make you feel? And allow them, start building that connection between what happened to me and how I feel inside about it. And again, it goes back to the emotional intelligence of the child and what you're trying to develop.
And that's one that's really on the parents to foster too, because I feel like the more in tune you are and the more you ask those penetrating questions, the better results you'll get.
Yes, and what also they can do is help them by revealing what you feel. You know what just happened? You know how I'm feeling about that? I'm feeling sad. It's okay to let boys connect with their emotions.
Which is why you need to provide them with positive role models too, because they need someone that's positive to talk to about it.
Yes, and the reason I mention that one is because there's a lot of single moms raising families raising little boys, or dads who are not there, or in prison, or, you know, whatever. You got to find positive role models for them to look at and to learn from, because little boys look at their models and go, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. That's how I'm supposed to treat those kinds of people. That's what I should be doing. So that's a good thing to do.
So you need to find the positive role models. And lastly, what parents need to do other than fostering good communication is to institute really firm boundaries.
They've got to have firm boundaries. And the same for boys and girls, but it tends to be more with boys. You got to create those boundaries, keep them in place, and set them up fairly, calmly, and be you know, consistent in how you're handling them.
Consistency is important, I feel like, in this whole thing. It's very important to be consistent with your kids, boys or girls.
Right.
Well, hey, Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I always appreciate it when